Aha, my mateys! If you're into salty seamen, you're gonna love this video. Hi folks, Matt Easton here of Schola Gladiatoria and also Easton Antique Arms. Now, I was putting some new stock on my antique website, and one of those things was this, and I thought, do you know what? I've probably never actually spoken about these, or at least not for a long time on my channel. So I should tell you guys what this is, because if you like the history of swords and you like to know about military history, or in this case, nautical history, then this is a rather important thing. This is obviously, I'm sure you all know, a naval cutlass, but it's a specific type of naval cutlass. So this is the 1804 pattern. Now, for anyone who knows about the Napoleonic Wars, if you're not thinking about the Roman Empire, then I expect you're thinking about Napoleon's empire. Then this was what one of the things that was used to brutalise the French at the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805. So there we go. The free world. You can thank us British for absolutely demolishing Napoleon. And obviously, so this actually was an 1804 pattern. We're going to talk a little bit more about the details of this in a second. But this was the cutlass that was used officially by the Royal Navy from 1804 onwards. We'll talk about what they used before in a second, because that's actually somewhat vague and interesting. So this was the standard cutlass from 1804. We could say until 1845, and in fact, if you look at most books, in fact, I'll just grab probably the best book you can get on this subject that I'd recommend is British Naval Swords and Swordsmanship by John McGrath and Mark Barton. And I've had some back and forth with Mark Barton, very nice chap, incidentally. So I highly recommend that book if you want more detail on this topic. But May and Annis is the big 2-volume work on British naval swords, incidentally, but that's harder to come by. Right, so this was the standard Napoleonic British Royal Navy sword. But if you're thinking, what do I care about the British Royal Navy? I'm American or I'm Norwegian. Well, you copied these, okay? So these cutlasses were also copied in the American Navy. They were copied by the Norwegians and a bunch of other people as well. So this is the Royal Navy version. So this was used against the French, and I'm sure some of them ended up in French hands because the French captured lots of British ships and we captured lots of French ships. Incidentally, my family used to build ships during the Napoleonic Wars, so I've read quite a bit about this. And my friend Drakinophil, if you haven't checked out his channel, if you want to know more about naval history, follow Drakinophil. He's a member of my fencing club, but also a good friend of mine. And obviously we collaborate with videos occasionally. So this was the standard cutlass, and we could say until 1845, when this pattern came along. So this is the 1845 pattern. In fact, this is another one off my stock on my website. So all of these things are on my antique website linked below. If you want to look at more pictures, or indeed purchase one, then you can find lots of swords there. However, there was this weird period in the 1820s and 30s when there were a bunch of experimental cutlasses. So there are cutlasses which come before the 1845, which are not official. They were maybe ordered in small batches for individual ships or by specific captains or whatever. So these are the official ones, the 1804 and the 1845. And there were later ones. We'll look at those in other videos in the future. However, as I mentioned, there were experimental ones which came between these two. And moreover, this 1804 didn't spring into existence fully formed. It was actually based on cutlasses that went earlier. Now, I'm going to go on a very slight tangent here and mention the great series Black Sails, okay? Now, if you haven't watched Black Sails and you like pirates, then I highly recommend you watch it. But one of the things I criticised many years ago on one of my videos was the fact that these cutlasses, 1804s, appear in black sails. And of course, black sails is set, I think, in the 1720s, okay, up to about 1727, I think it's set. So it's the early 18th century, the early 1700s, whereas this is from the beginning of the 1800s. And I was like, that's completely wrong. We shouldn't have these cutlasses there. Now, I wasn't wrong. However, it was more nuanced than I realised at the time. So I started looking into where these cutlasses came from. Now, this isn't known only as the 1804 pattern. It's also known as a figure 8 cutlass. okay? And that is because this circle here and this circle here, which are made like that really for economic cheapness, to make them cheap and easily to mass produce. These are mass produced, cheap, almost disposable objects, okay? The Royal Navy was really trying to penny pinch when they made these. But what it does mean is by having this thin section in the middle, it means you can cut out a double disc guard or a figure 8 guard, and then you just bend it there, and whoopsie day, you've got a, I don't know what that means, you've got a hand guard, you've got a sword guard of sorts that provides pretty good protection from the front, pretty good protection from the top. Yeah, it's a little bit exposed there, but it was easy to mass produce. So the figure 8 guard is almost a guard which is designed partially by protecting the hand priorities and partly by how can we make this as cheaply as possible with as little forging, dishing and everything else as possible. Now, where did this figure 8 guard come from? Well, as I mentioned, I thought black sails was completely wrong to show the figure 8 guard in the age of piracy. As it turns out, figure 8 guards, we actually don't know who invented them. There was a sword maker called Hollier, and it's possible that he invented them in the 1720s, or it's possible that someone else around the 1720s, 30s invented them, who's lost to the mists of history their name, the mist of time. So we don't really know where the figure 8 guard came from. Just the guard. We're not talking about the blade or the grip here. We'll talk about that in a second. The guard. So it turns out that figure 8 guards did actually appear just about within the end of the golden age of piracy. So if we consider that the golden age of piracy goes to about 1730, then indeed figure 8 guards were like a brand new invention, possibly in the 1720s. Or they possibly weren't invented till the 1730s or 40s. We're not 100% sure. So, was it wrong that it was in black sails? So it was wrong if it was an 1804 pattern specifically. However, a generic figure 8 cutlass could possibly have appeared at the end of that period of piracy when black sails is set. Right, so we've heard about the guard. The guard was possibly invented in the 1720s, 30s. Certainly it was around by the 1750s, okay? So by the 1750s, this form of guard was around. However, what about the blade and the grip? Well, the blades, first of all, at this time, were not regulated at all. So they could be straight, they could be curved, they could be broader, they could be narrower, they could be pointier, they could have a fuller or they could not have a fuller like this. They were unregulated. They were pre-regulation. The first regulation one was the 1804, which, as you can see, has a flat blade with no fuller, and it is straight with a spear point. Okay, so that's the 1804 pattern blade. Some blades before 1804 were like that, but others were a little bit different, curved, for example. The grip. So the earliest figure 8 cutlasses, which were found in both Britain and America and other parts of what was then the British Empire. The earliest forms seem to come with usually an organic material grip, either wood or very often antler. So very often we find in the early ones, we find a figure 8 guard with a curved blade or whatever with an antler grip. Now, when these started being mass produced for the Royal Navy, in around the middle of the 1700s, let's say 1750, 1760, one of the first things that the Royal Navy had to do is look at the organic material grip and go, that's not durable enough for us to, economically keep and maintain these. So they went for a tubular iron grip that was smooth, okay, a smooth grip without all of these knobbles. We'll talk about those in a second. And that meant that the grip, although it was very cheap to make, so they made an iron tube around a wooden former. And you'll notice they don't have any kind of pommel. Literally, that is the peen there. So literally the guard comes round and you just peen the guard onto the end of the grip. Super cheap, just like super basic for mass production. And they were making thousands of these, like churning them out and sticking them on ships. You know, they don't need to be fancy. They just need to be there for the rare occasions that your sailors are either boarding an enemy ship, being boarded, or they're cutting out, in other words, going on land to fight as either artillery crew or infantry or whatever. So, you know, they're not they're not used a lot like cavalry swords, and they don't carry the same kudos and kind of mystique of cavalry swords or officers' swords. These are more akin to like an axe or a hatchet. They are literally cheap, mass-produced things for the ship. Right, so these tubular grips. Now what's interesting is they were obviously fulfilled the criteria of being cheap, but what they didn't fulfill the criteria of was giving a good grip, because a smooth iron grip, as soon as it's wet or bloody or sweaty, is going to get slippery. So in 1804, the final thing, apart from making this straight blade with no fillet regulation, they introduced this style of grip. Now, I won't say that there weren't any of these grips before 1804, because military patterns in the Napoleonic period very often look at what's currently available. For example, the 1803 officer's sabre. They look at what's already in use and they go, oh, well, we quite like that blade that some people are using, and we quite like that hilt that some people are using. Let's combine those and make it the 1803 pattern. That's exactly what happened with the 1803 pattern infantry officer's sabre. And it's very likely that happened with the 1804 pattern cutlass. It wasn't a new invention. This is the headline. It was not a new invention. It consisted of parts that had been around for a while. So these types of blade had been around for, well, back to the medieval period on falchions and messers. This type of guard had been around since possibly the 1720s, probably at least the 1730s. So they've been around for a long time, 70 years by this point. And this grip, we don't know for certain, but it's very likely that grips like this had been experimented with. And so, or possibly it was a new invention in 1804. We just don't know. But anyway, from 1804 onwards, these became standard. And you'll notice they are ribbed for your gripping pleasure. But not only ribbed, they're also shaped. Now the previous grips had been completely straight. You'll notice this one is shaped a bit more like a sabre grip, a little bit curved on the back, a little bit curved on the front. It's also, if we look that way, it's a bit thicker at this end. It gets thinner and then swells out a little bit at the end. And it's got what's a bit like a hand grenade, actually. It's a bit like a cast iron hand grenade. We've got lines going vertically and many lines going horizontally. And the overall cross section of the grip is oval, which is great for edge alignment. I can exactly feel which direction the edge is pointing in. And the end result is quite a nice, although it's all made of iron, you've got a steel blade, cast iron grip, wrought iron essentially, sheet steel guard. It's not especially heavy, it's quite nimble, it feels a bit like a medieval hanger, a bit like a Wakefield hanger. It's a really nimble, nice thing, but with an incredibly solid and tough and practically indestructible hilt. Sometimes they do get loose. This one is absolutely rock solid. And in fact, let's say you can ring it because the construction of the hilt is still so tight. So there we go, the 1804 pattern cutlass, and what came after it and what came before it. And check out the series Black Sails if you haven't done already, and check out that book I recommended as well. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching. I have been Matt Easton of Easton Antique Arms and Schola Gladiatoria. And if you're not subscribed, please do so. It makes a huge difference to the channel and what you get out of it and what other people get out of it and the number of people who get to see it and things like that. And hopefully I'll see you back on the channel really soon. Cheers, folks. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.